Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Crucible. Tonight we're going to be doing part 3 on the demonic. We've done parts 1 and 2. The first part was with Brother Augustine. Second part was with Father Deacon Ananias, also known as the Norwegian Noose. We have all the links down below that you can get in touch. Make sure that you like, subscribe to their channel. They've been very good to the Crucible. We're also joined tonight by David Patrick Harry. He recently had my wife on his channel, and he knows a lot about world religion. We've been kind of looking forward to this broadcast for a long time. So I'm going to bring them both out, introduce them both. Father Deacon Ananias, how are you tonight? It's good to see you.
Good to see you. It's good to be seen.
Yeah, how's things in not California land?
Oh yeah. We're coming out of winter. I don't know about you guys, but it's
this is Michigan. It's perpetual winter, right? It's the middle of summer and it's winter in Michigan, you know. And David Patrick Harry, how are you tonight?
Doing great, brother. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome to the Crucible. It's the first time that you've been on. It's kind of a different place. We usually host debates and then a little bit of trash talk about public entities that I usually don't like and like to beat up on. But we've enjoyed doing this series on the demonic, and we're very, very happy that you're here. David, where can everybody find you?
Well, if somebody would be interested, I have a YouTube channel called Church of the Eternal Logos. I have a website that's just my name, davidpatrickharry.com. And then my initials, DP Harry, are usually the handle I have on various social media platforms.
Yeah, so I noticed that you had a channel full of like magic mushrooms at one point.
Yeah, I rebranded that one. Yeah, that was called Fractal Universe. Universe spelled YOUNIVERSE. And that was really part of my own spiritual journey, which is kind of the same thing with Church of the Eternal Logos, is me kind of talking about how I see the world from where I'm at. And previously, I made a lot of videos promoting people like Terrence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary, the Alan Watts type of worldview. And now I've sort of rebranded that channel as Religious Studies 101. And so it looks very similar to Church of the Eternal Logos now. And I plan on making a lot of videos on just educating people straightforwardly, factually about Buddhism, about world religions, and then so purely just based on the academic study of world religions. And then from there, if they want to hear my personal opinion, they can go over to Church of the Eternal Logos, which I view as more of a sort of ministry in a different vibe than the sort of academic study of religion, although it's obviously tainted with that that perception and approach to religion.
Well, before we kind of break in on the demonic, I'll tell you kind of a funny story. We had a couple of guys on here debating one night. And one of them was one of these open your mind up type of guys, right? he was really pushing the new experiences, man, you know, and this type of thing. And I couldn't help it because I have the control panel and I'm kind of a jerk, you know. So I changed his name to DMT Elf, and he didn't catch it for the entire debate. You know, he didn't catch it till the end of the debate. But I thought that was kind of funny, you know, kind of funny. So moving into the demonic, we've talked about the noetic realm here. We've talked about influential thoughts and kind of how to guard yourself from them. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we have not dove into, and I was kind of saving it, was the exorcism itself and demonic possession itself, the signs, the symptoms, what this looks like. And Father Deacon Ananias, I've had some discussions with you kind of in the background. And you have some actual intricate knowledge in this field. You've dealt with some exorcists in your field. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. What's the process for this like?
Well, every clergy's had some experience with it insofar as that the baptismal prayers are actually, there's an exorcism that's actually done. And they're actually really amazing prayers. I wonder if I could pull up and read some of them. Let's see. Let me do baptismal. But also I have not myself done any, you know, outside of helping a priest with, you know, the baptismal prayers. But I have talked to a lot of priests, or a good handful of priests that have actually been intimately involved in some pretty scary stuff. And so we can talk about that.
Yeah. So the thing that's interesting when I dove into this, I've talked to everything from Catholic exorcists, even to, you know, layman Protestants who claim that they can, you know, just in the name of Jesus, go you, right? And away the demons will fly, right? So, you know, and kind of everything in between. But what the common thread has been is that this is real. And some of the things, even from the movie The Exorcist, aren't that far off, that people do insane things when they're possessed. Everything from, I've heard stories that there is actual levitation that has gone on, people moving up walls in awkward positions, things like this. This stuff sounds very fantastical, but it seems to be fairly well documented. Is this something, you know, can this type of possession make body contortions? Can supernatural events happen as a result of this?
Yeah, I think so. One of the priests that I've actually spoken to that's done quite a bit of these exorcisms, and interesting enough, he's a convert to Orthodoxy, but he's not a convert from Protestantism. He was a convert from the occult. So God deemed to use his kind of background, you know, that he was already kind of familiar with this, and use that in his, you know, in his own priesthood, that he's familiar how, and he's given talks on, and I've talked quite a bit with him about how this works. Now, he says for the most part, it isn't kind of like the movies. It's very difficult to actually determine, he says, between mental illness, drug use, and demonic possession. So they all kind of look the same, and there's certain kind of tests that you can do to determine that. But mental illness and drug abuse, right, will really look like, you know, people will be like, I'm attacked, I'm, you know, the devil's speaking to me, and different stuff like that. What
I did, and I shot up heroin this morning.
Yeah,
Maybe that's why.
It's like, you know, take the drug test and you find out they've been up a week on meth.
Right.
Like, well, of course you do.
Of course, I'm sure you do see shadow people.
Yeah,
You haven't slept for a week, right?
However, a good test is that are other people in the house, are other people actually noticing stuff going on? That's usually, or is it just in your head? It's much like, I guess I would say, you know, when a doctor takes a medical history, what have you been involved in?
Right.
That's important. So it's the discretion of the priest, is discernment to be able to kind of figure that out. Keep in mind that demon possession is very, very rare. So more than and meth use isn't.
That's pretty common around California land, isn't it?
So you're probably like, more often than not, that, yeah, they're either mental illness or drug abuse or something like that. Now, also an interesting point is demons will pick on any weaknesses that you have. They're not going to be like, oh, this poor guy's got schizophrenia. We can't mess with him. They don't care about. They'll use those kind of weaknesses. There's also, we could talk about how does one get exposed to that? And there are 3 stages of what we call possession. There is, what am I talking about?
The 3 stages.
I'm blanking on this, but I got it. Oh, I got it. Manifestation or infestation. Then there's oppression, and then full possession. So there's like 3 different stages, and there's things to, you know, obviously kind of taking a history where you're playing with a Ouija board, where you're doing, so you're looking at odd behavior, night terrors. Are there repulsions towards like holy objects and going to church? If they're hearing voices, are other people hearing the voices? If it's just them, it's probably mental. There's things like this that you can kind of go through to figure out what. I can tell you some.
Now these stages can look fairly similar to each other, can't they? You would have to have some type of discernment to figure out which one is going on.
So let me give you a common one. Not common in the sense of the population that this goes on. But stuff, and this would fall under the category of a manifestation. So keep in mind, in one sense, we're all being attacked by demons all the time. And this is different, though. This is going, you know, we're not just being attacked with temptations. They're beginning to manifest, right, within our time and space, and not just within the noetic realm. And there's certain things that will allow that to actually happen. Obviously, if you're contacting, if you get out a spirit board and ask if anybody's out there, don't be surprised to find out if somebody answers, right?
Right. What was a stupid, like Charlie and those stupid games, you know? Right. So, those were all basically occult games, right?
Yep. So when I was teaching at my Episcopate, the kids how to do confession, and you know, it was just kind of an open time for, you know, feel free to, you know, ask about anything. And one kid was like, "So is playing Charlie a sin?" I'm like, oh. "Yeah, you're gonna probably go to confession for that one." But there was one I was like, and isn't that the danger, right? It just seems, it's like, oh, it's just a toy, it's just a game, but it's not a game. You're actually contacting
categories of how different world religions kind of conceptualize and understand the demonic realm. You have the strict dualist religions and worldviews, where you have demonic entities that are sort of self-created from the underworld or from darkness itself. then you could look at then the Vedic religions, for example, where you have the Devas and the Asuras, and you have the sort of brothers, right? That really good and evil somehow sort of coalesces back into unity or monism. And then you have something more applicable to like orthodoxy, which has been in various iterations you could find in maybe a few different world religions, but it's that the demonic is really the absence of positivity, which only has a single source. So does the demonic realm exist on its own? In a Christian or an Orthodox Christian worldview, we'd say, of course, it doesn't. All it does is it exists contingently based on God allowing it to exist and have free will to choose the opposite of God's will. Only God's energies have a positive existence. If you look at something like the Vedas, Buddhism, you'll see, well, evil sort of works with the good. And you can hear this in more 20th century people like Alan Watts, where, well, good can't really exist without evil. Evil can't really exist without the good. And so really at the larger
state of existence. Yeah.
Go ahead, Father.
The kind of yin and yang theory, right?
Exactly.
Yin and yang, yeah.
And then you have... And then
even in Islam,
like the Manichaeans or even forms of Gnosticism, where that's a strict dualism. So it's not that they work with each other; they're actually battling it out for eternity. And somehow these demonic forces have been created from a sort of different ontological place. So they're coming from the underworld, they're coming from darkness, they're coming from the demonic realm,
Hades, all these different,
exactly. Yeah. So I think it really, about, from my understanding and from my limited knowledge, about all religions fit into one of these three categories and how they understand the demonic realm and its own sort of ontology and existence.
Right. So you'll see this with kind of these tales of you hear this reference as the underworld, maybe. There's some type of ruler, there's dark entities there. It's interesting too when you look at folklore from across the pond, Ireland, Scotland, things like this. You get fairies and kind of the folklore behind fairy folk, and they seem to be intertwined with these different basically places that are of ill repute is where you're going to find demonic entities or bad entities or things like this. Right. And that's not necessarily by accident, is it? It does seem that places of ill repute do draw the demonic.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting in Buddhism, in a way, us as Orthodox would agree with, they understand. And again, Buddhism is very pluralistic. So I'm very aware that just to say this is true for Buddha, well, which school, which location, which geographical location, but in various forms of Theravada and of course Vajrayana, the tantric forms in Tibet, demons are understood to feast upon the passionate attributes and areas of human life. Now, us as Orthodox Christians, we'd say, well, that's again where we fall into sin, which is where we open ourselves up to the demonic, is when it's through a sort of gluttony with the passions and the sensuous and the pleasurable aspects of our life. But Buddhism is going to have a worldview where, again, they sort of necessitate each other. But this is why then you want to stay away in those worldviews from the demonic. And asceticism is understood as trying to avoid intercourse or interactions with any sort of demonic realm through pleasures. And that's why all suffering has to do with one's own desires, right?
Right. So they just preach, hey, with enough restraint, you're good.
Yeah,
right?
Basically.
With enough restraint, you'll be okay from any type of attack from these other worldly beings. And Father Deacon Ananias, that's really not true, is it?
And so let's talk a little bit more about the demonic world and tempting and bringing us away from God as light, and trying to destroy us. And then the difference, again, like I said, a manifestation, and then from a manifestation to an oppression to a full possession. So from what I understand, talking to Orthodox priests who are experienced with this, it has to happen by some type of contract that you're either implicitly or explicitly agreeing to. So let's talk first about what would an explicit contract or agreement be. Well, it'd be just like you're selling me something and I agree to, or I reach out and I try to buy something or get something from you, and there's an explicit agreement. An implicit would be something like you come to do, I don't know, paint my house, and I don't tell you to get off my property. And I watch you paint my house. I'll be financially, in a court of law, financially responsible for that because I've implicitly agreed. If I'm watching you, it's just like if somebody doesn't break into your, like if your doors aren't locked and they walk into your house and you don't tell, if you don't have a sign that says no trespassing, or you don't tell them explicitly, either through a sign or you telling them you have to leave my property, legally you're implicitly agreeing to that. And the demons work very similar to that. An explicit kind of agreement would be trying to contact them through a spirit board, through occultic practices or something like that. You're actually going, knock, knock, knock. Is there anybody there? Let's talk. I'm inviting you into my house, right? That's an explicit. I'm what do you call it? Procuring your services.
Right.
The other one would be implicit, when stuff that shows up in your house, and that would be like an infestation. That's what I said. That's the first stage that you would normally see, is noises in your house. Things possibly, weird stuff going on in your house. Scratches. Typically, it's not uncommon that they'll happen at certain times of the night. 3 in the morning is known as the unholy hour. There's often a lot of demonic activity at that. So if you're hearing, you know, like on the, and you're like, was it rats or, you know, what's going on? And let's say you're starting now to see stuff kind of move and weird stuff happening in the house. Maybe even voices and footsteps and stuff, knocks. Like that's typically from what I hear from Orthodox priests, that and a manifestation will actually begin to occur. Now, what people will typically do, suppose that's happening in this room. Well, what do people typically do? They leave the room. They're like, we're moving into the next room because it's creepy. Well, the demons just put up a flag. You basically implicitly agreed to, it's just like if somebody came into your house, a creeper, and was like doing a bunch of weird stuff in your room, and you're like, well, that's
walked in the next room, right?
Yeah, you basically legally are doing consent that like you can have and use my room.
Demonic squatter.
Yeah, right. Right. I'm a child of God, baptized Orthodox Christian, and this ain't your property. You got to get out, right? You're implicitly agreeing. So then what happens? Then there's weird stuff going on in the hallway, and the people won't go in the hallway. Bam, got another piece of the property, right? And they'll push them out, like out of their home. And if that doesn't get typically nipped in the bud, then what will happen is obviously you'll start to get oppression. Things will get a lot worse. People get really depressed, melancholic. And again, notice how this really mimics mental illness. They won't talk to other people. They might be great students, and all of a sudden they're failing out. So it looks like drug use too.
Right.
They isolate. They are completely depressed, and if, you know, they've got terrible thoughts, they got demonic thoughts. It's starting to come within them, right? And not just in the sense like when we're attacked by temptations, it's becoming more. It's becoming incarnate in you. And if that doesn't get nipped in the bud, then it will become, you still have, it's still you, but it's entering into your body and your life. And they may even get like physical manifestations and signs, like you were saying, contortion and you know, lack of eating and weird stuff happening. Full possession is a loss of the will. Like there is no you at that when the demon's operating, and that's extremely, extremely rare. As far as I know, this priest, maybe that's done, I can't even count how many times he's had experiences with this and have done exorcism. I think he said maybe only once in his life has he ever seen a full possession.
Well, this kind of follows the line with what I've heard from Catholic exorcists as well. They have stages of possession. They're not quite so simplified. I believe that they have 5 stages that they go through, but it's essentially the same type of thing when you're moving from oppression to full-blown possession. What the Catholic priests often say is that it's extremely rare to see a full-blown possession.
Yeah.
What's interesting about it, and I don't know if you guys know this or not, when I was researching this out, is that sometimes mental health officials themselves reach out to exorcists when they've exhausted all of their options. And it's a phenomenon that's not talked about a lot, but it does happen. And they do have people that they lean on for that. Are you familiar with that at all, DPH?
Well, I think historically speaking, you can look all the way back to tribal shamanism, and one's health is always tied to a sort of demonic activity. So within, again, shamanic practices, pre-existing Christ, pre-existing any sort of Christian understanding, we see a sort of archetype of Christ in the healing works of shamans or whatever they're supposed to be, a sort of prototype, a typology, if you will. And they believe that disease, as you kind of hear people say, well, dis-ease, right? Well, they believe that disease in a way was tied to one's spiritual life. And that's the role of the shaman, is for the healing of the group. When you look in, again, world religions, mental health problems, disease, or what we would now consider mental health problems, often associated with some type of demonic understanding. And so like Father was talking about, contortions and sort of disturbed physical presence. Well, just look at any of the world religions, look at any of the ancient Indo-European religions, look at Chinese mythology. The demonic realm is always tied to animalism, these sort of contorted animalistic understandings. So again, he was talking about scratching. This is a cross-cultural. This is as old as we know that religion existed, or any sort of mythology to understand the world, that there's some type of forces that are more animalistic than they are human, or as an Orthodox Christian, made more in the image of God. Because this possession process, as Father was talking about, the loss of the will is the loss of that free will, which differentiates us from the animal kingdom, which is us being made in the image of God. And so I think it's really interesting, no matter where you look, demons or the demonic activity is often associated with disease. It was often associated with like aberrant, weird behavior within people. And it was often associated with people becoming less beautiful, like the loss of aesthetics of certain, because aesthetics themselves have a sort of order and there's a sort of harmony there. And so when somebody begins to lose just typical aesthetic features of themselves, it was often associated with some type of demonic possession or activity.
I want to just add something real quick, Andrew.
Sure.
Because I thought that there's a guy in the chat here that says, why is it that theists are the only people who see or experience demons? That's not true. And Patrick, you can talk about that too. So Terrence McKenna, I was going to do an impersonation, but I'm not going to try it.
Well, now you just disappointed the whole audience. Just get out of here. I don't even want you here anymore after that.
Terrence McKenna, I mean, a lot of these psychedelic, psychonaut gurus and stuff, they're atheists, right?
Right.
And what do they tell you? They're contacting beings. And the other thing to keep in mind, too, is I would say atheists probably do experience and see demons. But what do? Everybody filters their sense datum through their paradigm. And it's like, well, okay, so according to my ideas, that can't be obviously a demon. You're going to interpret according to your atheistic paradigm, right? So that's why it's going to be like, well, there's a medical explanation. There's that must have been the wind happening. So it's not to say that atheists don't actually experience they just ignore or reinterpret that according to their conceptual framework, which is what I always talk about, right? You don't just see stuff, you see it as under a concept, as Kant says. And so that's not really a good objection. And I know Patrick can talk a lot about the psychonaut gurus too, who are, they're atheistic. I mean, in some sense, it's like the religion, they pull from different religions. They don't believe in God. Like if you press,
so a traditional theistic worldview is a sort of separation between creator and creation. When you get into many of the sort of what I call psychedelic mysticism, and this is what my PhD research really focuses on, is the historical use of inebriating substances from the shamanic period to the 21st century, and how that's tied with technology and our understandings of singularity and transhumanism, and how all this stuff, there's a mythos tied to all of it. But when you look at psychedelic mysticism, it isn't traditionally theistic, because there isn't this separation of a creator, eternal God, then with creation. Almost all these traditions that get into inebriating practices reinterpret the physical world or creation itself as somehow eternal. And I think we are also seeing this in the contemporary period with the multiverse theory, because it allows then creation to just have eternal big bangs, and it eternally goes. And so it's still then, there's no separation between creator and creation. And the realization then is that I am ultimately the sentient apparatus of the universe. I am God. And so when you start looking into a lot of the literature of the 20th century of these sort of psychonauts, they will talk about demons or evil or good. And it's really just based on getting into these inebriated realms and how one feels based on their phenomenology, based on the emotion when they encounter them. How does it make me feel? Then dictates whether it's a good entity or a negative entity. But all of it then is, again, monistic. It's all there to just educate me, and they necessitate each other in different ways. But they're not traditionally theistic, yet at the same time, they would recognize some type of entity that transcends space and time, that exists at a sort of parallel realm. Again, if you're talking about Terence McKenna, when you get into the DMT, the high, machine elves, but you don't have to be traditionally theistic. You don't have to be monotheistic. You can be pagan. You can be shamanic. All these different religions. You can look into the ancient Veda tradition. They all have these understandings of somehow we as human beings, Homo sapiens, we exist in a place where we have contact with an unseen realm that comes to us from two directions.
Well, now this is discussed very heavily by not just occultists, but even by scientists, right? They used to call this the Aether. Before the Aether, you had these kind of psychological ideas of the id or the super ego, or any number of different things which dive into not just the subconscious, but the stuff that everything around you is made out of, that you can't really understand or see, and is not scientifically explainable under observation. And I think that one of the things I was going to bring to bear also is that when it comes to possession, that there is some good scientific basis for the fact that what's going on with you psychologically does manifest itself in your health, in your well-being. This is not really disputed anymore. In fact, part of a routine checkup at a doctor's office is they ask you a series of questions about your psychological health. Right. How's it doing? Things like this, because it can be responsible for a large amount of physical ailments. So when people say things like, hey, you're being kind of silly if you say that there's some type of possession that can lead to physical ailments, that sounds absurd. Well, it doesn't really sound that absurd when you start to understand that just your psychological state of mind can stop your heart. It can give you high blood pressure. It can do all of these horrible things to your body. And I'm guessing that a lot of people have probably run into this, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, just kind of moving the conversation, kind of in this direction for the physical manifestation of these problems. If you have exhausted all forms of psychological effort, it doesn't seem to me to be very outlandish that you would look towards a person's spiritualism.
Right. And even using secular language, if we want to keep it in sort of psychological therapeutic framework. If you're addicted to pornography, that is a sort of possession. If you have an addiction to heroin or what, because as Father Deacon was talking about, again, us approaching it from it has to do with the loss of your free will, which the free will only exists in the eternal Trinitarian Godhead itself, which freely chose to create separation of creator and creation, of which then us being made in the image have that free will. So then we can see any of these things as you lose your free will in some degree, you're in a way you're being possessed. Now, maybe you don't believe, you're a materialistic atheist, but you have an obsession, maybe you're addicted to drugs or something of some sort, or you have a sex addictions. Is that a form of possession? I mean, even within secular language, they'd say, well, yeah, maybe it's a psychological possession of some sort.
Which kind of leads into this super chat that came in for $5, actually. And I did want to also bring up the fact that if you're going to brainwash large swaths of people, one of the best ways to do it is to use drugs and, psychological mechanisms to lower barriers. If you were a person who was stalwart in your thoughts when it came to possession, things like this, I'm sure that drugs would lower your aptitude to be able to fight these types of forces off. That
Right.
seems totally reasonable to me in pretty much, every conceivable way. David for $5 says, is there any place for psychedelics like mushrooms? I don't understand why God would create them, then make them edible if we can't eat them.
Well, just because something's edible, there's a bunch of poison berries out there. You can find arsenic in. I remember these sorts of kind of arguments that when I was younger and promoting this kind of stuff too, and it was the same thing. It's almost like, do you remember that what we used to say when a kid? God made dirt and dirt don't hurt, right?
Well, but dirt does hurt. It does hurt.
That's not dirt. It's dog poop, dude. Don't eat it. So, I mean, in one sense, anything that exists is good.
Right.
So there's nothing in a positive state of existence that's actually intrinsically evil. That's a Christian doctrine.
Right.
So it is about, well, how is it used? Obviously, dirt has its use. Poisons have its use as well. So you really have to look at it that, like, well, what are you intending to use it for? Is it a misuse? And that misuse is where there's a sin. There's something going wrong. You're missing the mark of, and it destroys. Misuse either kills you or, destroys your soul or the community around you. So those are the questions that you need to ask. Is there any type of medical use with magic mushrooms? I do know that they're actually from the synthesized magic mushroom, the psilocybin, using them for cluster headaches.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But I don't think that, they're probably doing pretty mild doses. They're not like going out of their mind or something like that. That would seem to me to be an appropriate use.
Right. Well, and like you were saying, it depends on how you're approaching everything, because everything's laden with our presuppositions. So if you're approaching it as the sort of Christian frontal as you're talking about, well, we exist right now in a fallen state. And so unfortunately, things aren't in the state of their pure goodness, and are the inebriating substances that exist in nature forms or variations or typologies of what the fruit of the tree of knowledge would have been if we didn't fall. Some type of because these psychedelics are perceived, and I think what's being insinuated in the question is somehow it's an elevating spiritual force, and therefore why would God create something that allows me to engage in a process of inebriation that elevates me spiritually? Well, it depends on how you're even understanding and what is the advancement of spirituality in the first place.
Well, like Patrick, like you always said too, first of all, and with my epistemology, I'm always doing this. How do you know that you're in a heightened and a better spiritual state, right? How do you know that you're knowing something, right? I'm always kind of applying this question. And as you point out, the psychedelic community, kind of New Age community, a very kind of naivism of like, well, because it feels good, right? I have this kind of phenomenology where, and the other thing too is that not just in the New Age, but I would also say within a lot of the Protestant sects and a lot of religion, there is no concept of self-deception, delusion, a prelist. It's so that's a great epistemological question, that you think that you're Jesus and can fly out there.
Right.
It's not actually true, and you end up killing yourself or something like. How do you actually determine that you're having a good religious experience, that you're contacting good entities, right? Because they told you,
right?
They told you like, oh, we're good, and I'm giving you a good feeling. Cannot human beings who are far less than demons fool you in that? Con artists, right? I got a good feeling from this guy, and then all your money's gone out of your account.
And that's not to say that people haven't got in inebriating states and had true insight. For example, me quitting them was from me doing them. And so it's much more complicated than just these simple answers. And okay, is the clinical research that John Hopkins, and we know what John Hopkins is associated with, but is the clinical research looking at PTSD and the use of MDMA and the use of psilocybin and moderated doses within clinical trials, is it having positive beneficial results? Yes. Psychedelics dissolve boundaries at the phenomenological level, at the conceptual level. That is what they do. And so if you are having a problem where maybe you went to Afghanistan and you're reliving in a sort of boundary filled reality of memories and trauma, yeah, I could imagine that having a constructed experience where somebody gives you something that dissolves those boundaries, that allows you to get outside of it, and then you can better incorporate or understand that experience. Yeah, that might have positive beneficial effects. But when you dissolve boundaries, that also dissolves the boundaries between you and potentially the demonic or prelest or deception. And so what you're doing is you're really opening up, because where is the mind? Again, you're talking about the logismy. You know, where does the mind exist? I know where my brain is. I know where I'm at geographically, but where is the mind? And that's why the mind is the battlefield for our spiritual world. And I'm sure Brother Gustin probably talked about that in the part 2 that you're discussing. But where does the mind exist? And that's what psychedelic is, mind manifesting. That's literally what it meant when it was constructed by Humphrey Osmond. So then the other term they use is entheogen, which was developed by Carl A.P. Rock, and that is God within. So that is a theological presupposition that what psychedelics do then is dissolve boundaries, conceptual, cultural boundaries that prevent you from realizing that you are God. So both terms, and that's why I actually prefer psychedelic. I think it does catalyze sort of cognitive things within your own mind. That's why, depending on where you're at, in your own mind, is going to really dictate how you're going to experience your trip, whether it's LSD or DMT or ayahuasca or various species of mushrooms. So it's just much more complicated than that. And they're ancient, and clearly people discovered these and they were used in various ways. It's not, that's why Christianity and Orthodoxy, in most Orthodox religions, so you can look at Orthodox Zoroastrian, Orthodox Islam, Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox Judaism, Orthodox, most traditions were suppressing these practices. They were most concerned with inebriating, drugs, and promiscuous sexuality, because those things are going to dramatically reinvert the perception of what is right or what is wrong or how. And that's exactly what we're seeing in our own world. And so, trying to stamp out or deal with inebriating drug use has been a common problem that has been dealt with Orthodox any sort of religion.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. You're essentially making the case that it's kind of an out of the frying pan and into the fire kind of thing. You can use these things in a way to help yourself get outside of maybe a terrible or horrific experience, kind of self-medicate. But there is kind of a deal there, right? A deal of sorts. And the bad end of that deal is that you're now lowering your own barriers from any type of suggestion that may come from the noetic or from outside forces. Even if it's not demonic, it would still even open you up to suggestion from other human beings with more ease, wouldn't it? Like all of these things, it seems like it's a trade-off. Seems like it's a trade-off.
Yeah, well, and that's why you see very few people who engage in high dose. I'm not talking about microdosing, but higher dose psychedelic activity. You hardly hear of anybody who then comes out of there and doesn't believe in a sort of spiritual reality. Because again, it's dissolving boundaries. It's dissolving the boundaries between us and whatever that realm is, or where it's at, or how we engage with it. Is it our mind? Is it our heart? What exactly allows us to engage in that realm? It puts you in there. It makes you more suggestible. So then when you look into theories of magic, and somebody like Alan Moore, the comic book writer who's a self-proclaimed magician, he talks about that magic is about entering the mind and exiting the mind. And so you look at Grimoire. Grimoire, is, according to him and Aleister Crowley, has to do with grammar, language. Language manipulates our mind. Magic is occurring, and this is the sort of theological then understanding of how magic is an inversion of the word, the incarnated logos, the logos itself, the word of God, and that ceremonial magic. That's why in ceremonial magic you can conjure these demons. And the point is that we as humans exist in this weird in-between space where we can actually control demons if we know their name. And naming and names becomes really, really important. And even as Orthodox, we don't want God to ever forget our name. Memory eternal, right? Because naming is a sign of possession. We want to be possessed by God. We want to be part of his family. We want to be owned by him. People who engage in ceremonial magic get into these grimoires where they find these ancient different names of various entities, they could be all over the world from different cultures. But once you have the name, once you perform the ceremony, now you as a human can enact knowledge, you can gain some type, but there is always an exchange, because it has to get something from you for you to get whatever it is that you want from it.
The classic Faustian deal.
Right.
Yep. I got to read you this. It reminded me of, you were saying too, that the use of drugs of human beings to possess other human beings, to make them more susceptible. Governments are well known, and scientists are well known for this. I was thinking about when I was teaching this course on political philosophy. Arthur Kessler's Ghost in the Machine, he has a section mutating the future, and it says, in 1961, the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center organized a symposium on control of the mind. And Professor Holger Heiden of Göteborg University made headlines with his technical paper, Biochemical Aspects of the Brain Activity. And in this, I kid you not, it says, here's the quote, in considering the problem and control of the mind, the data give rise to the following questions. Would it be possible to change the fundamentals of emotion by inducing a molecular change in the biological activities in the brain, the RNA in particular? And it goes on, and it actually names certain drugs as well. I'm trying to remember the name of the drug that makes you extremely susceptible. Oh, here it is.
LSD?
No. Tricyanoaminopropine is one of the drugs that they were working with too. And notice it's all around the same time, 1961, when they're talking about this. And here is something right in a symposium, a medical school, right? A medical center, and the scientists actually talking about, the use of drugs. And what's interesting about the tricyanoaminopropine, it's not like a psychedelic. You're not going to have this kind of, dissolution and breakdown, loss of ego and stuff like that as a psychedelic experience. They're already messing around with drugs that could make you extremely susceptible, because he goes in here through mass communications and media, right? So you're using media and a kind of polypharmacy. They're already going, we got to get into this. This sounds awesome.
Right.
So there is a type of, like, even without getting into, if one were an atheist or something like that, you have a concept of possession, using drugs and to manipulate and control somebody's mind. There's a loss of will to deceive them. Is it that far out to actually think that, there is a God, if there is a God, and that obviously even more intelligent beings that were not beneficent would actually want to do this too.
Right.
And we'll
And even magic itself is all about the will, right?
Yeah,
And so it's about establishing one's will over nature, over demons, over other people's wills. And without getting into any specifics about anything, we can imagine just within the last 2 years, we've seen scenarios where somebody's will is having enough effect to allow people to, or unfortunately, people fall into a state where they lose their own free will and they go along with an agenda that may actually be moving them closer and closer to death itself. That they, in the absence of losing their free will, is actually running towards death in the fear of death. And so this is a form of possession itself. This is a form of magic. This is the whole thing. It's everywhere. It's right here in front of us. It's the propaganda on the TV.
Or Hollywood. We know what that word means, right?
Exactly.
A holly stick, right? The to cast a spell using the
most power. It was privileged in the Druidic tradition to get magic wands made from the holly tree. And so if you watch Harry Potter has a very special wand. Remember, he goes to the wand store. They tell him it's from the holly tree. Hollywood then is a magic wand. And we see that they're casting spells every time they do a movie.
Well, as we look, kind of at the broader overview, I think that that these concepts for a lot of people are very difficult to grasp because they're
okay. Let me explain it to you. For all the people that this sounds like way over your head. Okay, demons, demon possessions, this eternal war. All it is the Marvel series, dude. They're teaching you about demonology, right?
Doctor Strange is the psychedelic.
Yeah, I mean, I joke, but like it actually is. It's
where's Thanos fall? Right? Where's Thanos fall? Mika for $10 or Micaiah, I'm sorry, Iraq combat vet who used, I don't know what that word is, in light doses until I was invited to an ayahuasca ceremony where I was told a snake would heal me. Nah, I'm good. I heard that story before. Confessions heal.
Amen to that.
Yeah. I've heard that story before. This snake will heal you. Yeah. Where does that sound? It kind of rings a bell. It's kind of interesting, DPH, that you bring up grimoires. I read a story a couple of years ago, and this was right here in Michigan, that it was a prominent, you would call them warlocks or witches, the male witch. Mm-hmm. He was a Russian, actually. He was
very practicing.
Practicing witch. And when he died, his grimoires went for over $2 million. And to think that people will spend that kind of money for something that they don't think will work, or that they're stupid people to begin with when they're able to have that kind of money, seems absurd to me.
Right.
That there's nothing to this, doesn't it?
Yeah. Patrick, how about this? Oh, Montana's too far and too much money, but I'm going to go to South America and spend thousands of dollars to have an ayahuasca.
Right. Rub the poison tree frog. The poison tree frog, right?
As you were talking about the super chat mentioned being healed by a snake. I mean, all you have to do is look at the caduceus. Our modern medical system uses that symbol to identify itself as a place of healing. Is the caduceus, which comes from Hermes, and then back to Egyptian understandings of Thoth and all this different stuff, the god of wisdom. And the serpent has very interesting symbolism. Again, we find the serpent is very prominent. Snakes are very prominent throughout world religions. And like you said, people wouldn't spend that money if they thought it was just like a bunch of poetry on paper or something. Anybody who's been even mildly associated with the occult realm knows that it's real. When I was deep into the psychedelics, I was very much interested in these concepts of the secret and self-manifestation. And that led me to listening to talks by Grant Morrison. I believe he created the comic The Incredibles. And he was he got into psychedelics, got into sort of esoteric Eastern mysticism, and became very interested in magic, as did Alan Moore, another comic book artist. And Grant Morrison talked about sigil magic, where all you have to do, you want to practice magic, take your desire whatever it is, your desire is that you want to have another $2,000 this month, something that's not totally far-fetched, you know, but something that it would definitely be outside the norm if it were to happen. And you write it down. You say, it is my highest desire to have another $2,000 or have $2,000 by the end of the month. Again, this is the inversion of the word. This is the inversion of the logos. You're taking a non-physical thing. It's desirous. You're taking your free will, and now you're taking something that is in the quote unquote ether or the mind or wherever. And now you're making it two-dimensional. You're writing it. You're using letters. You're manifesting it physically. Now you go through and you mark out all the vowels, because vowels are only phonetic. They have no meaning. That's why we can read words if they're just consonants. Now you just have a series of consonants. You mark out all the consonants that repeat. And now you have a series of letters. You reconfigure those letters into a symbol. Now you have what's called a sigil. And now you can power that sigil. You can power it, one, by getting it implanted into your subconscious, which often uses masturbation and looking at it during the peak of orgasm. Or you can get it into other people's minds by putting it in public places. This is where we see corporate logos. The more people then that see the sigil empowers the sigil. It makes the sigil more real. Or you can put it in like places that you don't normally see it all around your house and just begin to try to implant it in your subconscious more and more. Those are three prominent ways that people use sigils. I did sigil magic, and as soon as I saw it was real, that kind of sort of set me on a trajectory that eventually got me out of all that, because it makes you ask, okay, dang, magic is real. What does this then insinuate about the entirety of the spiritual realm? Because you can actually do these rituals, you can actually do these things and actually change reality.
But Patrick, talk about, like, notice too, and you are engaging with the demons. Now, doing this stuff is particularly dangerous because you actually are making an explicit agreement that, like, hey, let's make a deal, right? But notice, as Patrick had said, it's always concerned with will. Mm-hmm. Right, and Crowley talked about this, right? Yeah. So the thelema, right, that love is the you know, all the sum of the law for him was not in the sense of like self-sacrifice, martyrdom, or anything like that, but the desire of the will, fulfillment of desire, right? And so when Patrick was talking about all these things, it's getting what you want, mm-hmm. which is just the opposite. And that's another way to look for the demonic. It's the inversion of do what you want. This guy telling you got to do all these rules. Yep. Don't lay down your life for other people. That's ridiculous. You should do what makes you happy, right? So that's why, and I just found a really good book. I forgot about this, the Everyday Saints. If you get a chance to read this, there's an account in here during the Soviet time of, and a lot of these guys actually talking, they later become priests, but at the time, you know, it was thoroughly atheistic in their university, with the rare exception, though, that they had a teacher who was involved and interested in the occult. And she taught them how to do seances out of class. And they started contacting these entities that were pretending to be their favorite, you know, historical figures. I think one was a Russian poet called Gogol, and the other one was Socrates. And what do? They give them information. So during one of the seances, they had contacted and said, you know, is Stalin going to be, you know, the leader of the country? Kid you not, the entity says to them, no, Mikhail Gorbachev. They're like, who's Gorbachev? It would tell them who likes them in class, right? So this is all about fulfilling. I want to know the future so that I can fulfill my desire. And yeah, Gogol was a great Russian 19th century author. And then listen to this, right? So it goes on. So this is actually going through the three stages, right? So there's a manifestation through the seance, mm-hmm. right? Or the spirit board, that it's manifested. You're contacting and you're speaking with this. Turns out it's not Gorgo or Socrates, right? It's the demon plane. But then it's going to become oppression. So because they start to actually get depressed. And they contact it, and it's the entity is groaning and whimpering, and says, "What's wrong with you?" My friends asked. It says, "Help me, help me. Oh, I'm in agony. Help," said the mysterious entity. "It's unendurable. I beg you, help me." And of course, we all adored the works of Gogol, and we were certain that we were really speaking directly to him. "But what can we do for you?" we asked, truly wishing to help our beloved writer with all our hearts. Help me, I beg you. Please don't abandon me. The flame is frightful, the flame and the sulfur, the agony. Oh, it's unbearable. Help me. We're ready to help," we said passionately, "in any way we can. But what can we do for you if you're in another world?" The spirit slowed down and then cautiously said, "Oh, my dear youngsters, if you are truly ready to take pity on a sufferer." "Oh, of course we are. Just tell us what to do." "Well, if you're ready to help, then I'd give you some poison." So, and they immediately go on, and the words hit them, and they were petrified because they actually felt at that point they might actually take it. That they developed a relationship with this entity so far that it actually had control over them, and they were actually worried they were going to kill themselves. So
Right.
It starts off nice, right? Oh, it's my favorite poet, writer, and then it gets control over you, just like in an abusive relationship, right? The abusive dude, like, what's the Julia Roberts, Sleeping with the Enemy?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting that you bring this up. There was this comment in the chat, and I'm going to address it. These are particularly annoying because I feel like James, for instance, this guy in chat, really hasn't listened to a word that's been said, or he wouldn't say something this stupid, which is, you guys said that one can speak or make a deal with these entities. How do you go about summoning Satan or a demon? I want to see myself if they exist. Well, but you already did. You already made the implicit deal already, just with this, right. There's no more reason for you. What more can be done with you? It's already a done deal. You know what I mean? That's the whole.
So notice
what
the
they're talking
phrase
about.
that he says, "I want."
Yeah.
Right.
I want to see if they exist.
And that's what
that demon just told you. Take some poison. He'll show you.
Yeah. Ceremonial magic is always about a form of empowerment, which is always about, again, the will or thelema or whatever it be. That I want to talk a little bit about John Dee and Edward Kelly, because very similar parallel scenario there with just the story that Father Deacon laid out.
I don't mean to cut you off. I was going to actually lead into that with my next question, actually, which was with John Dee and Enochian magic. The thing that's interesting about this, I sat through a lecture on this. I went to one because I wanted to hear more about it. The guy was an expert in Thothian magic, which I've always found interesting. It was kind of the baseline that Crowley always alluded to. Everything came from Thothian magic, even though I don't think he really understood it very well. I think he was half charlatan, half magician. Right. Nobody was better at creating a reputation for Crowley than Crowley, right? But the John Dee and Enochian magic, the reason I was going to lead into this is because it's kind of the perfect segue to explain what happens when you think you're talking to angels, or you think you found a way to beat the system. We have the magic decoder ring now that can tell us all of the things that we need to do. We can discuss with ethereal beings kind of at our whim and at our will. We've beat the system, right, David Patrick? We've mastered it. We've got it down. Right. And how does that end?
Right. Well, it ends with him giving his wife to the charlatan Edward Kelly, who didn't have ears because he'd already been found to be a scoundrel and a charlatan. And so, the whole story with, as I'm sure you know, Andrew, with Dee and Edward Kelly, is that Dee was one of he had the best library in all of England, and we're talking about at the time of Queen Elizabeth, and he was one of the most learned men in England. In fact, he had many scientific inventions. he would be called to the court of Elizabeth and to other rulers in Europe to cast their astrology, because again he was so in depth with all this magic. Now, meanwhile, again, the Protestant Reformation, the problem with Protestantism is it divorces mysticism from Christianity, and what we see immediately in Northern Europe is the proliferation of the occult and magic, and you can see this. That's what the 30 Years' War was about. The court of Rudolph II over in Prague is that he was getting really interested in the occult. He had a very weird, strange court and ruling over there. He'd have midgets. He'd have, jugglers. Like the whole like weird king archetype really comes from Prague and Rudolph II. And John
this
Dee,
is with the court jesters and all the bizarre, weird mask wearing and the weird balls, and all of that really came out of this. And when you think about it, I think people reference this as being European kings, like in France and in England. But you're really right. That really was in this Prague area where all this weird, bizarre garbage was going on, isn't it?
And this is yeah. So we have the Holy Roman Empire, and we see that Prague and Rudolph became very interested in the occult and the Hermetic revival that with the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, translated the Corpus Hermeticum. This was profound. This was, Hermes was believed to be older than Moses. So this then reoriented a lot of the intelligentsia of what then is the oldest text. And they had this belief, and we can trace the concept of religious perennialism, that all religions lead to the same truth, to the magical yearnings of the Italian Renaissance, because that was their idea. They believed in a sort of classicist understanding that the older something is, the better it is, because everything is sort of a diluted version moving forward. It's the opposite of progressivism. And so they understood that to be the case. Therefore, if they could translate Hermes, they could have access to the perennial wisdom, the foundation of all the religious texts. And so this led then people, then you have, that's the mid 1400s, the 15th century. We have the Protestant Reformation, 1517. So we see the break with Protestantism, breaking from the Catholic Church, allows, and then Protestantism so overly rationalistic that all the magic begins to really get going in Northern Europe, and England being a central place. John Dee really represents the sort of epitome of the learned man who has dove into all these different things. He understood the Bible. He understood scripture. He understood the theories of magic and alchemy and astrology. And so he claims in this pursuit and this knowledge of magic that one day a black stone just fell from the sky into his garden. And this black stone, this obsidian stone, he looks at it and he called it the shoe stone. And it's still in the British Museum today. And this shoe stone, he believed was magical. Well, then all of a sudden, this guy named Edward Kelly, who again didn't have ears because he was already considered a charlatan, claims that he can look into that black stone and he can commune with entities. John Dee doesn't believe him. So then they perform certain rituals. Edward Kelly goes into his altered state. He looks into this black stone and he communes with these entities. I think it was like he would talk in like Latin backwards. And then John Dee would have to write it all out. And then he'd write it all out. He'd get all the sayings and reorient it. And then it'd be a long, coherent message. And they believed that they were communing with the angels. And they developed, as you're talking about, this Enochian magic. They believed Enochian was the language of the angels.
I have all the manuscripts for Enochian.
Yeah, I have the whole diaries of John Dee over here.
It's interesting. It's an interesting dive into madness and absurdity. And the fact that they thought they were even communicating with archangels. They didn't, yep. I mean, these weren't just, they couldn't just have regular angels, DPH, we got to go for the archangels too, We have to have the best of the best. So these guys really didn't put a limit. Father Deacon Ananias is right. And it was a lot, if you read the words that they say, a lot of I want. This is what we're trying to do. This is what needs to be done because this is what we want to be done. And we want to be advisors to the world. We're going to change it all.
Right. And their basis was that it was all about gnosis. It was all about this secret knowledge that John Dee, and I don't, it's a mixture. I'm sure it was ego. I'm sure it was prelest. But I'm sure it's maybe some some piece of him was that he believed that if he could get some piece of eternal truth that the world hadn't had, and he was able to manifest it within space and time, that it would help the world. It would reorient our understanding. But
well,
what
they were
it
pretty
does,
famous too. You know, they got a lot of fame. They got a lot of money
Right.
from this. I mean, there was a lot of material gain to look in their little scrying stone and talk to archangels and things like this and come up with this gibberish language.
Yep.
You know, there was some coin in that. You know?
Yeah. And it eventually led them to the court of Rudolph II, because he was very interested in this stuff. And so the 30 Years' War was that Prague was thinking about converting over to this sort of Hermetic Protestant worldview that John Dee represented. And that's where we get, you know, Frederick the Elector Palatine and this 30 Years' War is to make sure that the Catholic Church was not going to let this thing get out of hand. And that's why they went to war. And so eventually Edward Kelly and John Dee, they start making their way. And this is where we even get the whole 007, because John Dee, we know, was sending the messages back to the court of Elizabeth. So she knew what was going on in all the different royal courts that were calling John Dee to cast their astrology. So then he gets to Rudolph II, and he wants lead to be turned into gold. He wants to see it. And so they start doing their alchemical practice, and all of a sudden the magic stops working. They stop getting the messages from the angels that they were getting on their travels and from England. And then Edward Kelly tells John Dee, and again, John Dee's a very prominent person in English society, and he had a very beautiful wife that was much younger than him, that, oh, the angels told me that we have to swap wives and have sex, and then they'll tell us the next message. They'll tell us the next piece. They'll tell us how to, again, turn into this lead into gold. John Dee did it, and this was, again, in his diaries, the worst decision of his life, because she never forgave him for that, because he basically forced his wife to have sex with this criminal. And eventually, John Dee's summoned back to England, so he's able to leave. Rudolph II says, "No, you don't get off the chain that easy, Edward Kelly. You got to stay here. You got to make this lead into gold." And eventually, he tried to escape, and he dies by sliding off one of the Spanish tiles on the Prague roof. And
well,
so
how many Faustian deals can you make in a lifetime? You know,
and you see the archetypal patterns over and over and over. So he falls to his own death. He's basically imprisoned by a tyrant king that's, again, himself very much interested in magic and power. John Dee, it breaks the bond of this young woman who believed in him and trusted him and was supporting him, and it was, she was the apple of his eye, and it ruined everything. His pursuit for knowledge, his pursuit for gnosis.
And how can you not look at this tale and understand that, of course, the demonic was involved? It follows every single roadway, every single path. It even has the classic crossroads involved. It has everything that you would ever need to kind of make these different connections. And Father Deacon, I'd like you to speak to this. But before you do, you have to answer to the $10 super chat, which says, quick question, Father Ananias. Isn't it a fact that dudes who subscribe to your channel, Patristic Faith, are 63.7% more likely to grow a primo ortho beard? Link in the description.
My gosh, that's a perfect, Nada, great to see you. I should actually just give me a perfect idea to actually start selling patristic faith beard growth
products.
Well, you should partner with Abbott Tree Farm. They got their own beard oil over there on Vashon Island.
Yeah, that's a great.
Yeah, promo code Dr. Deacon.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you got a promo code PFaith, right? That's how you would do it. Yeah. You got for looks like $4.49 pounds, right? John Dee wrote the works of William Shakespeare along with Edward de Vere, or Earl of Oxford. All 12 plays riddled with coded, looks like gematria, etc. Respect, lads. I don't know. Maybe you guys know what that word is. Gematria, maybe? I don't know.
Gematria, yeah. It's the use of like secret messages with numbers and words, that words then add up. Every letter has a number. Therefore, every word then has a sum. and those numbers then have their own meanings, and then every sentence, every paragraph, it's just a
Like
continuous,
Kabbalists use a lot of this.
uncoding. It's very Kabbalistic. So Kabbalah, but gematria can be found in a lot of different ancient languages. That's certainly a debated topic. I personally don't subscribe. I think William Shakespeare did write his own works, but I have heard that before. So
it's funner to think that he didn't, though. It's just a spot of fun to think that maybe he didn't, and maybe it's just loaded with. See, the thing that's funny to me, I try to always get these concepts to people in ways that they can understand. I was talking to a group of I don't know, I was maybe 6 or 7 guys during a concealed carry class one time who were asking me about magic because I've studied the occult for years. And one of the things I tried to explain is the concept of a talisman and how magic actually works in real time. And I'd say, you know, is there any hunters here? Yeah. Say, well, okay, well, what's the rifle that you always take with you, right? No matter what, even though there's better rifles on the market, you'll only ever use this one. Why? Well, it's because I shot, 20 deer with it.
Right.
Well, if you do feel like if you used even a better rifle, you'd still have worse results. Yeah. Well, now you have an attachment to this thing, right? Now it's become some type of talisman to you, and it actually will affect the results of what you're doing, even though it really shouldn't, right? It really shouldn't affect the results, but it does, because this is the kind of power that you give this symbol, this talisman. And you'll see people in casinos who will carry their lucky rabbit's foot and all these other things. And you'll see that the results will shift if they don't have these objects with them. And that is magic.
Yeah. And then that shows, you could talk about the placebo effect, but the larger question then is just highlighting the power of the mind. And then again, we're getting back into the realm of magic and what words are and how all this stuff works.
Right. It is. But I mean, it's a way that I can get people to conceptualize something so simple, and they become so reliant and dependent on an object that has no power, except that you're willing that it has this special power, and it actually will affect the results of the things that you do. And it shouldn't, right? It just shouldn't. So back over to you. I'm sorry.
May I just say one thing too?
Beard,
I don't mean to cut off, but before we move too far from the Shakespeare thing, both can be true. Shakespeare could have wrote his own works, and they also could be filled with gematria, because he was probably into Freemasonry and he was probably into some of these occult ideas. We know that was a common regarding the artistic and the intelligentsia of that time. So I think both can be true.
Yeah.
But sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I was going to move the conversation back over to Father Deacon.
Yeah, absolutely.
He looks like he has been fervently Googling for the right stuff that he wanted to talk about. So we're going to pass the floor over to him.
Well, I just wanted to pick up what Patrick was saying, that whether it's referring to D or like any of the the people engaged in the occult and the magic, whether you're doing the seances, spirit boards or something like that, as you'd said, Andrew, there's these reoccurring themes. So the first one, there's a contract. Let's make a deal. I want something. Well, what's so stupid about people is you don't realize that with the deal, you've got to pay something. So these people think I'm going to get this for free, right? The demons require something. So Patrick, in the story that you were saying too, they require a sacrifice. You've got to give something back, right?
Right.
And the third thing too is they're deceivers. They're not con men, they're con demons, right? So they're going to trick you. And this is all throughout in like lore and whether it's the genie, right? I'll give you 3 things that you want, 3 wishes, right? Well, isn't there the monkey's paw too, is 3 wishes too? It always goes awry, right? He's always trying to trick you. And I just pulled up too, because I wanted to remember the story a little bit more. All of these, like the jinn can be a demon in Arabic lore. And another lore too in the Germanic is Rumpelstiltskin. So if you look at Rumpelstiltskin, it's crazy, all the themes in there. There's alchemy. Rumpelstiltskin, little demon, is going to teach you the secret of how to make straw into gold.
Right.
Convert But then there's you have to, so the king becomes rich or something like that. Isn't that how? And then,
yeah, well, and there's also the name. The name is what gives you the control, right?
Yes,
This
the name
is
gives you the control.
These are all the kind of thematics that you see over and over again to kind of explain the demonic, in a way that people can understand. These concepts. I can't agree with you more. You're right. It has the alchemy. It has the spinning the gold. It has the power of the name. It has the it has the deal. It has everything.
You have to give back, right? So your firstborn child. You have to give me your firstborn child. So there's a notion of even child sacrifice.
Yep.
And yeah, exactly. All these kinds of themes. And then when you look in actual cultists and stuff, you know, whether it's Crowley or Dee or Jack Parsons and stuff like that, they're all I'm trying to open a portal. I'm trying to get these powers, right? And Jack Parsons wanted it within, like, I'm going to get scientific knowledge,
right,
of jet propulsion and stuff like that. And well, it required a sacrifice. He dies. Crowley goes insane as a drug-addled insane.
Right.
Like, the trick's on them, and the demons get exactly what they want. In that story, too. Hey, let's be friends. I'll give you information. Now it's time to pay. Drink the poison.
Right.
Now you gotta die. There has to be a sacrifice.
Both ultimately get what they want. It's just the persons don't realize what they're actually doing. And so, if you're talking about Aleister Crowley, perfect example. In my research, I just wrote a paper, and I ended with Crowley, began with Alicinian Mysteries. And Crowley's life, he became addicted. So he was all about using these drugs because he viewed his magic thelema with the use of inebriating substances as science. That by me being able to inebriate myself and then perform the ritual, it's basically like performing science because I can count on the repeatability of the inebriation. And so he got very much into heroin and cocaine, peyote, cannabis, hashish use. And eventually he got to the point where he was a full-blown addict, and he went to a doctor, and the doctor was going to help him. And then he refused because if people found out that the father of thelema, the will, the power of the will, lost the power of his will to fight against the drugs, then he thought it would I have the quote, they would blaspheme the gods. And so we see that in a way, when they die, they probably did get their knowledge. They probably did get the thing that they wanted. You see, but the Satan, the devils, the demons, when they get what they want just a moment before, and that's going to end your own life. That's going to force you to be an addict for the rest of your life, or whatever it be. And only then returning as an Orthodox, only returning to the power, the positive energies that can then reinvigorate you, live in you, and separate you from that. That's the only way that you will survive.
I want to bring up another example too, because for example, this priest has done a lot of exorcists, has said, look, it's really rare, but when he does ask when there's demonic activity or possessions, like what they were involved in, it was always something like I was messing around with the Ouija board, I did tarot, cards or something. And so they would say, but I didn't know. Right. So now they have this bad thing that's happened to them. But like I didn't have a bad intention. Right. And so he addresses this and says, look, think about it this way. When you use those devices, you're going into another realm. You're going into a realm that's not yours. You're going onto somebody else's property. So, for example, imagine you're walking around and you don't know it's somebody's property, and yet you take an apple, beautiful apple that you think's just out and not on anybody's private property. That owner, right, can charge you. You owe him. And there's no excuse under the law to be like, well, I didn't know I was trespassing. I didn't know it was private property. It doesn't matter. It was private property. You went onto that property and you took something and you owe the landlord.
Right.
It's the same thing when people mess around with the occult. You have gone out of your area onto somebody else's property, and they can enact a fee for that, and they will. You will owe them, right?
It's
I thought that was really powerful.
It's interesting you bring that up. One of the things I was going to kind of get into as I was taking notes here that DPH had brought up was, these various different magical grimoires. And all throughout a lot of these different spell books, if you read them, a lot of it's just nonsensical musing and things like this.
Blood of
usually
an animal on the full
moon.
And all this.
All kinds of bizarre stuff. You know what I mean? But one of the things I have found that's a theme in the more prominent ones, and even on the what you would call the kitchen witches grimoire that they pass down sometimes cross-generationally, not kidding, they really do.
I believe
is that a lot of them seem to understand that there's an exchange, that there's an exchange that happens. They just seem to think that this exchange is benevolent, that of course there's a price to be paid, but we're getting something in return. So it's even Stevens, right? And isn't that, like you were saying in Father Deacon, I think this is what you're driving at. That really is the great deception, isn't it? Really,
and I'm glad you brought up too that the third thing that can happen is generational curses. Things can happen from your grandparents, right? That made, some type of deal either in contract explicitly or implicitly that's handed down as a curse through. That's very much real too. And I don't know if you've probably read a lot about that too, but that's not just lore. That actually happens.
Right. Well, it's interesting that I know the Bible makes references to cross-generational curses, but also, of course, the occult end, they love that, right? That's a sign of a very magically sound family, right? It runs in the blood, as it were. So, of course, that's a theme there as well. But as far as cross-generational cursing goes, there's magical spells that are designed to do that, in fact, that they'll write down. And think of the kind of like actual evil you must have in your heart to think about not only cursing the person, but everybody in their line, all the way down, people you don't even know, this kind of thing. And to feel that that's totally appropriate to do, and even if you don't think it works, if you're a layman, you don't think it works. If this person does think it works, imagine how horrible a person like that must actually be, that they would be willing to curse a whole generation or two or three.
Right. I think through my studies, typically, not again, when the Bible talks about knowledge is power, it really is. And that's what then this whole conversation about occultism is about power. It's about will over other people's will. It's about power. And in the postmodern world, again, you read Foucault, that's the only thing that exists anymore is power. And the analyzing power and power structures and knowledge power and how knowledge relates to power and how epistemology is culturally confined to power structures. That's the only thing that philosophy should be doing then. And this is the realm of magic. This is the ladder of Satan itself. It's all about power. And it's all, so it's just this continual backstabbing to climb the ladder of power itself. There is
very
no
Machiavellian, isn't it? Very Machiavellian.
And so you look at, I do a lot of research with Gnosticism. That's one of the things that I spend the most time with. And Gnostic understandings and ritualistic magic was common among certain Gnostic groups. So were inebriating substances, i.e. the Carpocratians, the Borborites, the Ophites, various groups. And they were also engaging in ritual magic, usually orgiastic activity, sexual promiscuity type of stuff. And in this gnosis, this is all to attain knowledge, gnosis, power. And this is the Faustian bargain. And I think then that connects with something that when Oswald Spengler in The Decline of the West describes the West as that culture which made the Faustian bargain, that's what we're living through right now. That's what technology is. That's what Silicon Valley is. There has been a Faustian bargain within the Western mind since modernity to exchange morality, to exchange the sacredness of life, to exchange truth for power, for materialistic power.
Interesting you say that. Would you say that a box that is in your house that holds almost all of the collection of human knowledge and it's at your fingertips would be something that people in the old days would have traded kingdoms for?
Right.
And yet here it is, all the infinite knowledge in the world. And what do people end up doing with it? It seems that memes of kittens and watching pornography is the order of the day rather than utilizing it for anything that's useful. Right. And doesn't that kind of speak to what people would have paid once upon a time to have access to something like this? And yet here it is, and it's ready for all of us to use. And here's a picture of my kitty.
Right. And that has been a generational curse. Look at the West. Just compare it to Eastern Europe. It's a generation. We're living under a generational spiritual curse that has the Faustian bargain has already been done. We're just watching the consequences and the pieces unfold for the next, however, again, how long the world will exist, who knows? But that's what we're living in right now. And at the same time, I think, you know, with globalism, you look at the World Economic Forum, and I'm not going to get into any details, but then you see that, you know, is there any force in the world that's ultimately fighting against it? Or has, to some degree, the state of the world in 2022 is that all of the whole world has made some Faustian bargains, just the West and their pursuit of materialistic domination. You know, Francis Bacon talking about how science's job is to rape nature of her secrets. That's where we just accelerated the materialistic process of this Faustian bargain. Now the whole world is basically making this Faustian bargain.
But Father Deacon, surely there's hope, right? It's not just all darkness. It's not just all terrible, right? There is hope in all of this. This is your cue to tell us yes, right? This is your cue to tell us yes. There is no hope.
There's hope. If you just give me your money into my account, Alan, I will give you hope. No, the good news is we win. And that all the bad things, the tricks of the devil, death itself, are overturned. And that's what we as Christians are doing. What, as Genesis says, what man intended for good, evil, God intends for good. And he does. He makes all things right.
Yep.
Everything goes in its right place and all of nature is restored. Death is overturned and all will experience eternal life. So now if we think about it, there's so many great demonic stories that teaches about demonology in the Bible. So think about the first one is the story of Job that comes to mind. So you have to keep in mind that God can veto anything. He is omnipotent. So it isn't like, as Patrick said, with some of these dualistic religions, they're both equally powerful and they're fighting it out. Mm-hmm. Or it's the Marvel, like, we don't know who's going to win, right? Well, that's not how it works. God authorized, he's actually in control. So the devil in the divine council has to go to the divine council and actually petition the Lord God to actually torment Job. And the devil thinks he's pulling one over because his pride on that. He's like, well, the only reason why, because God says, consider my servant Job, there's no one like him in his righteousness. And the devil's, well, that's just because you bless him all the time. Let me curse him and watch him curse you.
Right.
Well, God in his own, the devil actually thinks he can pull one over on God, which is insane, right?
Right.
So he's the most intelligent being, but his hubris and pride actually make him retarded, right?
The archetype of the evil genius.
Yeah, which I always tell people, atheism will make you retarded, right? Like there's ideologies that will actually make you stupid. I've seen it over and over again. The most intelligent being becomes stupid and does something stupid, but God authorizes it. Well, why does he authorize that? Because he's sadistic and wants to see Job suffer? No, because not only will Job persevere and become more than he is and actually achieve theosis, right? because nobody can grow in their character without struggle. Job becomes like God in the struggle. And not only that, through Job's perseverance and the beauty that he manifests through the very, very worst, he saves thousands around him for thousands and thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
The devil's overturned and tricked. The trickster's tricked, right? And this is how it's all going to play out.
Right.
That's the hope, is that whether it's the elites, their plans always backfire, right?
Yeah.
They get going and they do a bunch of bad stuff and terrible stuff for a while. And everybody's like, oh, doom, gloom, nothing's going to get better. And then the empire collapses. Their regime collapses. Their plan fails. They have to come up with a new one, right? And it's the same with the demons, too. And they will keep going and defeated over and over. I would have got away with it, too, if it wasn't for you pesky kids, right?
Right.
Right.
Let's see who's really doing this, right?
Yeah.
Who's really under the mask. That's
yeah,
funny.
and so anyways, in the end, that's the hope, is that the devil's overturned. Like, God allowing for this creates a greater good than if he would have actually prevented it. Which answers the problem of theodicy, the problem of evil. Why does God allow this?
Right where I was going to go, yep.
Yeah, because God would only allow it, being omnibenevolent, omnipotent, is if he could bring about a greater good than if he would have prevented it. People think that's so absurd. Well, if you're a parent, you do this all the time, right? You allow your children to go through bad things. If you're good, assuming that because I can allow them to grow, I can bring about a greater good. Well, if you can do that in your finitude, think about God and his infinite wisdom, omnibenevolence, and omnipotence.
Right. And continuing that line of thought, given the state of the world, it was an instrument and catalyst for me to then move into an understanding of Christianity, because at first I recognized the evil before I believed in any sort of reality of Christ or you know, the deeper intricacies of Orthodox theology. I was deep into the New Age and psychedelics and the spiritual, not religious, and then slowly but surely still diving down conspiracy rabbit holes, and then you're piecing together larger puzzle pieces of reality, and then you begin to come to, well, maybe something's going on here. Maybe there is, you know, what is adrenochrome? Why are they interested in certain rituals? Why, again, I got all sorts of books on the history of magic. Why is blood so interesting? Why is the sacrifice of children, specifically under the age of 3, so important? And then you're like, well, geez, if the people that are the most powerful believe in this, maybe I need to consider this as part of the reality of the world. And therefore, people who are pursuing truth, God, in the state of the world it's if you are pursuing truth at this point, you're only going to eventually get to Christ. In my opinion, you'll eventually get to Orthodox Christianity, because that's the whole thing. Is like he's allowing something to unfold that we're now becoming self-selected. We're not Calvinists. We're not chosen in a way through God's grace, who allows all of us to choose. In a way, we're choosing it ourselves by the pursuit of truth, by the pursuit of things that are good. And slowly but surely, as the world gets worse, things get clearer for us who are pursuing the right things.
Isn't it amazing how many people have been coming to Orthodoxy? I've been talking to a lot of different people in positions of authority within various local church bodies. And what's interesting is how many have an occult background, or how many of them dealt in very evil or diabolical things for many years of their life. And suddenly, when they're reformed, they seem to be the most pious. Why? Because I think maybe this drives home what you're saying. They know the other side is real. It's not a joke to them. It's not just theoretical anymore. They saw it with their own eyes. And so the other side of the coin to that is maybe, like you say, if God's using it for good, perhaps to drive you towards what is real, what is true. And in this case, you know, I got to tell you, the ritualization of Orthodoxy, I think, would throw a lot of people off unless they understood how powerful the ritualization of magic was first. So it's not that out of bounds for me to understand why so many people would lean towards the Orthodox faith and move towards it if they're trying to get away from kind of magical practicing and thinking.
Yeah, and I'd like to follow that up, because I've been talking about how The occult, I think the occult is the most serious threat to Christian peoples or Christianity or whatever it is. You know, we all do
Humanity.
apologetics.
Humanity.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, okay, Islam has its problems. Atheism has historically been about 3% of the population. It really doesn't change that much. And even based on Pew Research, it's still about 3% of the population. But what's skyrocketing is people who identify as spiritual, not religious.
Yeah.
And so the occult can only be dealt with another form of ritualistic practice, a liturgical practice. So then you see Catholicism and Orthodoxy, or even, you know, these other world religions, would be better able to deal with occultism. Protestantism, because it's so overly rationalistic, it competes with other rationalistic systems: communism, capitalism, you know, socialism. It's a rationalized worldview. It can't compete with the multiple layers of reality that is actual religion and actual spirituality. So as we beginning the conversation kind of full circle with the inability of Protestants to perform exorcism, it's because it's the Faustian bargain, right? Everybody's moved to the head for the pursuit of knowledge, for the pursuit of that material knowledge, that there is no engagement with the irrationality or the unexplainable, the mystical. There is no mysticism. And therefore, then mysticism in the Western world is tied to the singularity. It's tied to the transhumanism. It's tied to sexual orgies and Wicca. And so it's like this weird fusion of rationalistic materialism with like the resurgence of primitive forms of spirituality and magic. And that's now like the sort of the state of the Western world, because Protestantism is just another ideology. It's almost not even a religion because it doesn't engage in those levels of reality.
Yeah.
Just the status quo, right?
Huh? Did you get
the status quo now?
Yeah.
The status quo of rationalism without any type of thinking. You know, even the Thothian magicians, they were all scientists, but they blended the metaphysical with what was there in biological reality. And you know, I think that most of the time in history, you see most cultures and their wise men do that. Not this one. Right. Not this one. This one's rejected it.
In some sense, it's very postmodern. So it's like it's a replica of a replica, but each time it's something stripped off till you just get this kind of like postmodern art, minimalism, right? The minimalist religion. What do I got to do the bare minimum to actually get into the kingdom of heaven? Any you know, ceremonial, theological significance? No, exactly. Just say these words and that's it, right?
Right. Well, that minimalism, then it's really what's the most minimalistic ways to acquire power.
Yeah.
Right. Which is then you get back to the psychedelics, you get back to the sexuality and the transgressing of sexual normality, and then you get into the technology and the centralization of power there, and they all go together.
You know, I never really put that together. The minimalistic way of acquiring power. I mean, that's what it is, right? I mean,
what technology attempts to do, right, is that, and this isn't a bad thing about technology. So techne is the tool of the artisan, right? So with the tool, you want to do certain things. So as you improve your technique, right, whether it's in sports or you know, your craft or whatever that you do, you don't want to go, well, watch my technique. I actually got to go through 35,000 steps just to actually get to, right, where a person, like, they break it keeps getting easier and easier, right? It means it's a better tool. It's a better technique, right? And so technology in itself has that that concept built into it. Now, the thing is you have to have kind of a paradigm in theology, right? Because it is a type of power, right? I want, and I'm going to do something with it. Now, the ancients they had technology. They didn't advance it to the levels that we do because they had kind of a theology and philosophy and worldview of a restraint. They never developed their techne beyond what would impede the far more important things. But we live in you know, modern society, in which we've thrown off metaphysics.
Yep.
You know, we've thrown off tradition, theology, God's dead, Christianity's out. So now there's just pure will to power, right? Which is exactly what Nietzsche predicted would happen. And so it's not a question of should we build it and make it, but we should because we can, right?
Right.
Which is kind of Marshall McLuhan's thing, right? Like the medium does become the message, right? There is no telos anymore.
Right. We moved away from the logo. I mean, McLuhan was a devout Catholic, and you know he converted as an adult in college. He was kind of an atheist, but exactly, he talked about the global village. Now, his work never wanted to put value into his theories, but clearly, personally, he was concerned again as we moved away from the word, from the written word to these sort of to what he considered primitive sensory ratios, that we were going to turn into the global village. And that's exactly what we're doing. And I loved, you know, when you added that postmodern angle and that stripping away, because it's never been easier to become possessed. Yeah. Right. It's never been easier through the TikTok, through the social media. So again, the stripping of layers is also stripping of the boundaries and the barriers between traditional society. You know, maybe somebody's never interested in this stuff, but if they grew up in a traditional society, a child, there's these natural buffers that is presenting that. But as we, and I have a book over here by a scholar talking about postmodernism in the social sciences, and she was talking about how one of the positive things perceived by the postmodernists is it moves us into the irrational, and so the rise of occultism has been tied with, you know, first of all, the occult revival was the 19th century. Everybody knows that the 1800s was when the intelligentsia was very much interested in the occult. And then we get into the 20th century. We get into the postmodernism mid through the 20th century, and irrationality then is privileged. And so look at our society, the TikToks, the social media, we're becoming, you know, the gender, Leah Thomas. We're literally diving into the irrational, i.e. Rudolph II and his court. It's the same thing. It's literally the movement away from logic, the energies of God, rationality. And it's what? Because we're led by a bunch of people who are engaged or possessed by their own addictions in certain ways, whether it be power, whether it be sex with underage people, that we are now we're on a ship leading towards this like irrational abyss.
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up. One thing I wanted you guys to touch on, I mean, we're an hour 45 minutes in. I'm not going to keep it past 2 hours for the show or keep you guys for much longer than that. But diving into one part of this aspect that you talk about, which is, you know, the TikTok and the this and, you know, all of these different kind of gateways that are basically forms of mind possession for sure. People become completely addicted to these types of things. They dive into them. There's also another element that people forget about, which is the parasocial relationship that happens with ginormous entertainers, ginormous creators, things like this, where they create something of a cult of personality around themselves. And they can literally lead people astray with a single word, right? A single word, a single action, a single, you know, even a movement of their hand can lead to action through these types of relationships, which are only seen online. In reality, generally people don't have this type of control, but for some reason, if you see it through the box, you know, and there's enough people watching it with you, it seems to have this type of control over your brain. And is a parasocial relationship where you really feel like the person on the other end is, you know, it's almost like a cult mentality. Isn't that in and of itself a type of oppression or possession?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just answer real quickly. I think it's the breakdown of authority. And so because there is no, what is the ultimate authority in contemporary Western society? Well, it's no longer a priest. It's no longer any spiritual leader.
It's you.
It's myself, and then it's me looking
democracy.
And then it's me looking for authority in the world. So then I look through the medium of television. I look through the medium of social media. What is popular? Popularity must be good. Popularity must be authority. And so as our society has inverted itself, people in the search for authority and all this, it is a form of possession. And I think it kind of comes down to the sort of the eternal search for what is authoritatively true and what is authority.
That's a great, I meant to bring that up earlier, that part of the break from the old world of antiquity, the destruction of, tradition and, Christianity and God. Part of that is the destruction of hierarchy that you see especially when you look at the political philosophy and philosophical movements, this kind of egalitarianism, right? This is where libertarianism gets its start. That comes from, there is a natural hierarchy and authority from nature, the family, the polis, the heavens, right? And what happens when you destroy that? Like when you get rid of that? Well, there's a vacancy, right? Something's going to be put in place of that, like yourself, another person who's not an actual authority on, right. Which is exactly what we're seeing.
Nicki Minaj,
right? Right. These people are not qualified authority. It happens all the time, especially because I do philosophy of science. And I had a dream about it last night, that I was arguing with all these scientists that thought that they had the absolute infallible truth, that they were the infallible magisterium. And I was arguing with this organic chemistry teacher in my who's an atheist, in my dream last night. And I was pulling all my philosophy of science books, and I'm like, you're not an authority on this, right? You don't actually know how this stuff works. And I think that's what we're seeing, not only with the scientism, but with all the pop culture as well, is you are making authorities who are not actually authorities.
Right.
That, my friend, there's a perfect word for it. It's called idolatry.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I've really appreciated your time tonight. What I'd like to end this with in the last 10 minutes with both of you is, we strayed all over the place. I do think that all of it had to do really with the demonic, to be perfectly honest with you. But maybe you can leave us with some words of wisdom on how to avoid these pitfalls that will lead to oppression, that'll lead to possession. What should we be doing? Give us some more hope, right? Give us some more hope.
Well, here, think about this. What did Patrick and I talked about? Evil is not life creating.
Mm-hmm.
There's no positive force in it. Evil is always the inversion and the perversion of good. So, and as clergy, we prescribe this as medicine and therapia. When somebody's struggling with a vice or something like this, do the opposite. What happens if you do the opposite of the evil? You do the opposite of the vice, right? And you practice it. And it becomes a therapy, right? Until you're strengthened in the virtue and overcome the vice that's actually possessing you. So if we're living in a world that tells you, get a divorce if you're not happy, right. Do what you want, get other people to serve you, what should you do? You should serve other people. You should volunteer your time. You should, if the world's impatient, you should practice patience. If the world is gluttonous and self-indulging, you should fast. Yep. If the world says that you're always right, celebrates pride, right, and do what thou wilt, you know what you should do? You should celebrate repentance. Do the opposite of everything the world is doing. Everything the world is doing is not life-creating, but is destructive.
Yeah, deliberately anti-life.
Anti-life, yeah. And so that's a great way. Start practicing everything the opposite of the world. They celebrate pride, you celebrate humility. They say you're always right and people should do stuff for you. You be persecuted. You turn the other cheek. You repent. You do all these things. And as Saint Seraphim of Syro says, then you acquire the Holy Spirit, that spirit of peace, and thousands around you will be saved. And here's a good way to judge: are these people at peace?
Mm-hmm.
they're not at peace. Like, look
Right.
at these ideologies. They're not, and even you might get even tricked by some of the new age where they're talking about like, oh man, it may not be patently obvious with somebody's religion or philosophy that they're not at peace because they may put it on a facade, and everybody does that. Because that's one thing I learned about, like, you know, hippies and the new age. They put on the facade that like we're all love and non-judgment. They are some of the most judgmental, bigoted people you'll ever meet. You just got to get below the surface and realize that. Right. Some people, like, you can see clearly they're not at peace. They wear it on their face. Is like Patrick said, there are philosophies and even political philosophies and ideologies and religions that literally make you ugly.
Right.
They change the way that it's a possession. It's an evil. What are demons? They're noetic creatures, right? What does it mean to have an idea, an ideology that possesses you? You can't think straight, and it actually distorts your physical and makes you ugly, makes you angry. It's demonic possession.
Yeah.
You know, before we get to you, I did want to address this question because it's important. Why is BPF always grimacing? So I've participated, moderated hundreds of debates. When you participate, so this used to be my I think you're stupid face. But when you participate in enough debates, it becomes a permanent feature. And I can't turn it off. I want to, but I don't know how. So I just wanted to let you know, it's not that I'm permanently grimacing. It's just built like this.
Oh man, he's got a permagran. Oh
yeah. Go ahead, DPH.
I think Father pretty much summed it up. I would probably point to what's worked for me is I think when it clicked in my head that the biggest differentiating feature of the incarnated logos of Jesus Christ and what he teaches as how to get closer to God is humility. That separates Christ and Orthodox Christianity from every other world religion as a sort of method to get closer to God. That really what we do is humility, and humility obviously is repentance, but humility is, I think, the surest way to not get into a sort of possession or a state where you're in contact with demons, because it assumes, as long as, again, you're recognizing true authority in regards to God's reality, I think you're protected. That's the whole thing. That's why Christ was the way he was and it hung out with the people he did, is that he wasn't a political leader. He wasn't a military leader. This wasn't about an ego thing. This wasn't about power over people. It was about humility, to show submission and to show that it's a strange paradox. Like somehow through humility, we elevate ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And that's then the whole thing about Orthodox spirituality and why it's distinct from the other world religions.
Isn't it interesting when you bring that up? You say it's paradoxical, but maybe that's really something that we just see kind of in our daily lives. You can't learn without humility, right? It's impossible. You know, this the man who knows everything knows nothing. You know, right. So that's it's kind of an interesting take. Thanks for the hope, gentlemen. Father Deacon Ananias, shout your channel out. Tell everybody where they can find you.
I've changed it to Patristic Faith. The Norwegian News is dead. He died. He's dead. Yeah.
No. You're like,
oh, we had a wonderful funeral. It was amazing. I'm so sorry.
You know, that's a shame.
I'm still the Norwegian News on Patristic Faith.
Okay, but when you appear in the chat, it's not the Norwegian News anymore.
No, it's Patristic. I have become incarnated with the very idea.
He said, through your humbleness, you were elevated above it. Right? So,
I just merged into the oneness of that is.
David,
Spirit of the times, Father.
Where can everybody find you?
I'm sorry.
Where can everybody find you?
Best
He's
way.
Patristic Faith now too.
No, they're all Patristic Faith now. What happened?
See, the one and the many are not. opposed. It's a both
It's
and together.
It's the Borg over at the Patristic Faith now, right? You're going to be part of the collective.
You can find me on Church of the Eternal Logos. That is my primary YouTube channel. I also have another one called Religious Studies 101, which is going to be a sort of academic approach to the study of world religions. And then you can find me on Instagram as DPHARRY, same on Gab. And those are really the three main. And then you can find me on Rockfin at DPHARRY. And then you can always go to my website. I have exclusive video content. Tonight we just talked about the esoteric origins of Islam and was Muhammad manipulated by Salman al-Farsi, the Persian. You can get exclusive video content by becoming a member over at the website. That's davidpatrickharry.com. So those are the best ways to reach me.
And I will also give a shout out that Based Homeschool Mom, most of you in chat are familiar with her. Most people who will be watching this video are familiar with her. She does not recommend that many channels because she does not think very many people are all that interesting. And I tend to agree with her. But these are two men who she highly recommends you go check out. So I couldn't agree with her more. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It was a great show. And you guys have a great night.
You as well. God bless.